Well, we have got a treat for you today. We're about to talk to this guy who is a really, really cool dude. His name is Wes Modes. He's in Santa Cruz, California. And basically what he does is he is an artist who's trying to preserve the stories of people who live along rivers. So what he's done is he made this boat out of junk, basically, and, you know, he kind of just floats it around, gets stories from people, and he's been doing all these oral history projects, which I think are going to be very, very interesting. Okay, Wes, let's bring him in. The connection is excellent. I'm very excited about this. So how did you get this idea? Like, how did you start off doing this?
Hi, Ari. Thanks for having me on.
You bet.
Well, I was floating down a lot of rivers on these, what we were calling punk rafts. So just rafts made out of recycled construction material and so on. And sort of like an addendum to my, like, train hopping career when I was young and foolish. And I really love the idea of having a boat on these rivers. I really wanted to connect with these river communities. But what I found a lot of the times was that we'd move through these communities and they would have receded all the way to the freeway, you know, 5 miles away, and the Walmart that was near the freeway. And the little river communities that were along the river were no longer there, vanishing or going extinct. So I started working on this larger project to build a more permanent shanty boat that we could float down the rivers and collect these oral histories of these people.
So how long are you on the boat at a time? I mean, is it weeks at a time? Do you live there sometimes? You know, like, what's the deal?
Time, actually. So when we were on the upper Mississippi River, we were on the river for first a month, then the next year 3 months, and then I was on the Tennessee River the entire length of it, 658 miles over 2 months.
Wow.
And wow. This year we'll be on the Sacramento River for a month.
That is really, really cool. Now, do you have like a home base where you keep the boat in the backyard or something, and then you bring it out when you want to go down a river, or what?
Yeah, I live in the mountains of Santa Cruz. So if during the summer the boat is floating down these beautiful riverscapes in the winter, and it's hiding in the redwoods of the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Those are some big trees from what I hear. So, like, did you have these oral history projects in mind when you started doing this, or did you start off and you were like, hey, I just want to kind of get out here and talk to some of the people, and then you realized, like, wow, there's all these stories here that I want to tell?
Yeah, something like that. When I first started building the boat, it was kind of like an escape from my ordinary 9-to-5 job. And the more I started thinking about, like, floating down those rivers, I didn't just want to be a tourist. I was really excited about the idea of giving something back to those communities, to really listening to folks. And that listening is part of my art practice that is really well received by the communities through which I move. People are very excited about the boat, about the project, about the stories that we're listening to and retelling.
So what's the final goal for the project? I saw a little bit of your stuff on Vimeo. I mean, is this going to be one of those things where you can get, are they going to be like short? Are they going to be long? Where are you going to be able to find them? Like, where's going to be the place that you want them to end up?
So this is the third year of the project. So we've been taking those oral history interviews, which can be an hour, can be even 3 hours at times, depending on the stories that people have to tell. So these all become part of a scholarly archive that can be used by researchers who are interested in what's the current state of river communities and rivers in America. But then also people are telling stories from their childhood. So people could find out about you know, what were things like in the Depression, or what was it like growing up before the dams and locks changed the profile of the rivers. So there's this scholarly archive that happens. I'm working on a series of books, as well as we take excerpts from the video on a regular basis and post them on our blog, and people check those out. We're really involved in social media. So there's lots of layers to the project that allow people to interact with it.
You know, I was reading some of the notes here, and I know that you've said that rivers are becoming gentrified. I hope I said that right. Because the reason I'm asking this question is because I legitimately want to ask what that word means, because first of all, I've never heard it before, and I think it's important to the story. You know, you're saying that you're trying to preserve the stories of the original people that lived at the rivers. Like, maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So For about 150 years, 200 years, rivers were literally the sewers, the places where if you were, a cheese manufacturer in Minneapolis, you dumped all your whey into the river, and like magic, it would just go on downstream. Well, that's great, unless you live downstream. All municipalities that were on the rivers literally dumped their sewer into the river, and it would just go away. Lumber would throw their scraps into the river. So for years, for a century or more, it was just the place that like all the stuff you didn't want would go. And that included people too. So new immigrants, freed slaves, itinerant workers, and so on would often live either in shanty towns along the river banks or in shanty boats in river communities all over the continent.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, and so what happens when we as cities start turning our attention back to the river and start realizing this prime real estate, and we start revitalizing and revising, especially through the 80s through the 90s, start turning these neglected rivers into something that we care about. Well, that's great, and that provides cleaner water, cleaner rivers, nicer environment, but at the same time, we haven't really looked at what happens to the river communities that have flourished in sort of this neglect for years. And so these people slowly get priced out of these communities.
So, of course you're doing the documentary type stuff, the oral history projects to try to tell the story, but, from what you've seen, do you think there's anything that can be done about this? Or, are you working toward trying to figure out a way to maybe make some of this stuff better?
I mean, mostly what I'm doing is listening and reporting those stories. So, I have a personal agenda of seeing challenging, I guess, the homogenization of river communities, or I guess all American communities, right? That we don't necessarily want everything to look the same if we go from Tennessee to Oregon or California, We want to have heterogeneous communities that have a unique feel and unique and authentic character. And I think that by listening and reporting on these stories, I hope that maybe it spurs people to start to look at and challenge these forces of homogenization and gentrification.
I totally agree with that, man. I remember when my wife and I were looking for houses, we were moving recently, and we would look at all these neighborhoods where all the houses looked exactly the same. They were right next to each other, but, there was a tennis court or there was a pool or something, and I just kept saying, I can't do this, man. I gotta have a house by myself. I don't want anybody too close, everything's kind of unique in the neighborhood we live in now, and there's no HOA, which of course is fantastic. Let me get to the boat. I want to ask how did you make that? What was involved with making that boat?
So that boat represents sort of my values of of wanting something unique and unusual. The boat is a collection of recycled and reclaimed materials for the most part. It's built using plans that emerged from probably the early 20th century. It's very similar to boats that people would be floating on the river, living in Pittsburgh or something, who are, on one of those three rivers, working in this industrial town, but also kind of squatting the river, or along the banks of the Mississippi or the Ohio or the Missouri. So it's a wooden hull, barge-bottom boat that we built from scratch, and then everything above the decks is all reclaimed, recycled materials. Part of it, in fact, is an old 100-year-old chicken coop that somebody was glad to have us disassemble and part away.
That is so cool. Now, I'm wondering, when you've been on so many rivers, you've been doing this for a little while, what are some of the coolest things you've seen, the most noteworthy things that you've come across?
I mean, there's always a certain edge of danger when you're on the river. If the boat sinks, that's not so good, right?
Correct.
But I think that probably the most interesting thing are definitely the people that we meet. So, we met a woman named Betty Goins in Knoxville, Tennessee, and she told us a story about how there were prowlers on deck one night, and she went and got what she called the sawed off and told them, "You guys better get off, or I'm gonna shoot you with the sawed off." And they said, "Never you mind, you just go right back to bed." And she shot them.
Man.
And then they're yelling at her from the shore saying, "You shot us." And she said, "You come back." She said, "You come on back up here again and I'll shoot you again."
The sawed off. Wow, that is the first time I've ever heard that used like that. Oh my goodness.
And so these people we meet are like, sometimes like she was a total character, but I mean other times they're perfectly normal people. They're you know, water experts and scientists and people who own houses near the river and want to connect with you know, other people who own marinas and bars alongside the river. And they all have their stories to tell, and they all have sometimes a conflicting, sometimes a complementary stories about the river. And they're always interesting to listen to. And it tells this story of these like vanishing river communities and the challenges they have.
There's kind of this aspect of what you're doing that it's kind of like, I feel like for a lot of people, it's like a little bit of a, you know, like a pipe dream almost. You know what I mean? Because, you know, we all go to work. You know, you work in a cubicle or something like that, but you're taking this boat out and you're meeting people floating along the river, smoking the pipe. You know, everything is just like awesome. It looks like it's really kind of a relaxing thing, and then at the same time you're making these kind of these documentaries. And by the way, before you go, I want to plug your website. Or I don't know which one you want plugged, but I was on his Vimeo website. I mean, if you just search Wes Modes Vimeo on Google, you'll find probably, I would imagine, as much stuff as you need to know about you, right, Wes? Is there anything else I'm missing?
The project website is peoplesriverhistory.us.
Okay.
And so we're always happy to have people. It documents not only these people that we meet and the places we go, but also our own personal journey, which is often very comical just because it's like the mistakes we make and stupid stuff we do and things we learn from. And all of those contribute to this like kind of crazy, outrageous story. People literally tell us, just like you said, you're living my dream. So people, especially since we're meeting people who live in river communities, and they say like, oh, when I was 14, we got a bunch of logs together and made a raft like Huck Finn style. And I've always wanted to do that again as an adult. And sometimes we meet people who literally have done this as an adult. And so the idea that we are not just having this adventure, which is okay, right? But also stopping and listening to people's stories. That means a lot to people, and people tell us that all the time.
That's really cool stuff. Wes, thanks a lot for hanging out with us. Keep doing the good stuff, man. Hopefully you can see some more rivers. I'm sure you're going to be, what did you say? You've been on the Mississippi, the Tennessee?
The upper Mississippi for 2 years, the Tennessee last year. This year it's the Sacramento River through a very contested space in California's Central Valley, where water and immigration are issues that come into play. That'll be interesting to hear the conflicts in those communities. And then the year after that, we'll have some other river, maybe the Ohio, maybe the Hudson.
Some big rivers, man. Mississippi, Ohio, Tennessee, Missouri River's pretty big too. That'd be a good one to check out at some point.
That was the first river I was on, actually.
Oh, no way. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, they've had a lot of flooding there recently, by the way. Anyway, all right, this was really cool. So thanks a lot for hanging out with us. And for everybody who is watching, we'll see you back here next time.
Thank you, Art.